The Galactic Military Academy's Training Facility 7 had a reputation that preceded it like a bad smell, which was fitting since most of the training involved actual bad smells, and toxic gases, and the occasional dimensional rift that leaked existential dread into the ventilation system. Standing in the center of what could generously be called a classroom, if classrooms were typically built to contain apocalyptic scenarios, Commander Vex surveyed his latest batch of cadets with the expression of someone who had just realized he'd volunteered to babysit a nuclear reactor. Commander Vex was a Krathari, which meant he looked like someone had crossed a rhinoceros with a filing cabinet and then given the result a really bad attitude. His species had evolved on a world where the biggest threat was mildly aggressive space moss, so naturally they'd become the galaxy's foremost experts on military training. The irony was not lost on anyone except Commander Vex himself. "Attention, meat sacks and various other biological configurations," Vex barked, his voice carrying the authority of someone who had read exactly one leadership manual and taken it as gospel. "Today, we begin the poison gas survival drill." A collective shudder ran through the assembled cadets like a wave of pure terror mixed with regret about their career choices, except for one cadet in the back row who had just raised his hand with the casual enthusiasm of someone ordering coffee. "Yeah, hi," said Cadet Jake Murphy, the only human in a class of 47 various alien species, most of whom were now staring at him like he'd just volunteered to juggle live grenades. "Quick question about this poison gas thing. Did anyone think to bring marshmallows? Because I've got a bag of them in my locker, and honestly, this sounds like the perfect opportunity for some quality campfire time." The silence that followed was the kind of silence usually reserved for moments when someone accidentally opens an airlock or suggests that maybe the war with the Zephyrian Empire could be settled with a strongly worded letter. Commander Vex blinked slowly, his three eyes focusing on Jake with the intensity of someone trying to figure out if they were having a stroke or if reality had just taken an unexpected left turn into Crazy Town. "Cadet Murphy," Vex said, his voice carrying the careful tone of someone addressing a potentially unstable explosive device. "Are you suggesting that you want to roast marshmallows during a military survival exercise designed to simulate exposure to lethal atmospheric conditions?" Jake nodded enthusiastically. "Well, yeah. I mean, you said poison gas, right? That stuff usually burns pretty well, and I've been craving s'mores since we got here. Plus, I brought graham crackers." What happened next could only be described as a masterclass in how different species process the concept of impending doom. And apparently humans process it by thinking about snack foods. Cadet Blorp, a gelatian whose species resembled what would happen if someone gave sentience to a bowl of lime jello, immediately began what his people called emergency liquefaction. Within seconds, he had melted into a quivering puddle on the floor, making soft, burbling sounds that roughly translated to, "Why did I leave my nice, safe swamp planet for this?" Meanwhile, Cadet Zara, whose crystalline quartzian physiology made her look like a walking chandelier, with anxiety issues, began vibrating at a frequency that shattered 3 windows and made everyone's teeth ache. Her species' traditional fear response was to resonate until either the threat went away or they achieved interdimensional phase shifting. The maintenance crew was not going to be happy about the windows. Cadet Finn, a molluscoid whose shell was currently sealed tighter than a politician's campaign promises, had retracted so far into his protective casing that only his eye stalks were visible, and even those were quivering like they were considering the shell party. And then there was Cadet Zix, a Vopernin whose gaseous form was currently cycling through the color spectrum like a panicked rainbow. Vopernins changed colors based on emotional state, and Zix had apparently unlocked emotions that didn't have names yet. Through all of this chaos, Jake Murphy was calmly unpacking what appeared to be a complete camping setup from his standard-issue military duffel bag. He had somehow managed to fit a folding chair, a portable grill, and what looked suspiciously like a sleeping bag designed for outdoor adventures rather than military exercises. "Murphy," Commander Vex said, his voice carrying the strained quality of someone whose worldview was currently being reconstructed in real time, "where exactly did you get camping equipment? This is a military academy, not a recreational vehicle dealership." Jake looked up from arranging what appeared to be actual firewood. "Oh, this? I picked it up at the academy store." The Zentorian clerk seemed really confused when I asked about outdoor survival gear, but he was super helpful once I explained that humans like to sleep outside for fun sometimes. He threw in the marshmallow roasting sticks for free. Commander Vex slowly turned to look at his assistant instructor, Lieutenant Kex, whose expression suggested he was seriously reconsidering his career in military education. "Lieutenant, remind me to have a conversation with Academy Supply about their inventory policies." Sir, Lieutenant Kex replied in a tone of someone who had just realized they might need to update several thousand pages of military regulations. Should I also inquire about why the store apparently stocks recreational camping supplies? Add it to the list, Vex muttered, watching Jake test the stability of his folding chair. Add it to the very long list. The poison gas survival chamber had been designed by the same architects who apparently thought that welcoming and likely to cause immediate psychological trauma were compatible design philosophies. The walls were a sickly green color that seemed to pulse with malevolent intent, and the ceiling was equipped with enough nozzles to supply a small city's worth of atmospheric nightmare fuel. A plaque by the entrance cheerfully informed visitors that the chamber had a 93% failure rate, and that was just for species that were considered moderately resilient to toxic environments. The small print mentioned that these statistics did not include psychological casualties, because the Academy had run out of space on the plaque. "All right, meat sacks," Commander Vex announced, his voice echoing in the chamber with all the warmth of a tax audit. "You have 30 minutes to survive exposure to Class 7 atmospheric toxins. Standard protocol is to utilize your emergency breathing apparatus and attempt to reach the extraction point before succumbing to respiratory failure or existential despair." The cadets filed into the chamber with the enthusiasm of condemned prisoners heading to their execution, except for Jake, who had somehow managed to bring his entire camping setup and was now arranging it in what he apparently considered the optimal location for outdoor dining. "Murphy," Vex called out, "what exactly are you doing?" "Setting up camp," Jake replied, as if this were the most obvious thing in the world. "You want to get your fire going before the gas starts, otherwise the ignition can be a bit tricky. Safety first, you know." Before Commander Vex could process this statement enough to form a coherent response, the chamber's automated systems kicked in. Nozzles hissed to life, and a thick green gas began pouring into the room, like the collective breath of every villain who had ever cackled while explaining their evil plan. The alien cadets immediately went into full survival mode. Blorp, who had managed to reconstitute himself into a roughly humanoid shape, slapped on his breathing apparatus with the desperation of someone trying to perform CPR on their own lungs. Zara's crystalline form was now vibrating at a frequency that made the entire chamber hum like a tuning fork having an identity crisis. Cadet Finn had sealed his shell so completely that he resembled a military-grade bowling ball with trust issues, while Zix was now cycling through colors that probably violated several galactic treaties on visual assault. And then there was Jake Murphy, who had somehow managed to light a campfire in the middle of a poison gas chamber and was currently roasting marshmallows over the flames with the relaxed demeanor of someone enjoying a peaceful evening in the wilderness. "Oh hey!" Jake called out cheerfully over the sound of 46 aliens trying not to die. "This gas burns really clean, much better than that synthetic stuff they use on Proxima Station. Anyone want a s'more?" The silence that followed was broken only by the sound of Cadet Zix fainting, which for a gaseous being involved a lot more dramatic color changes than you might expect. Commander Vex stared at the scene through the chamber's observation window, watching a human treat a lethal survival exercise like a backyard barbecue. His 3 eyes blinked in sequence, like a computer trying to process information that had somehow corrupted its basic understanding of reality. "Lieutenant Kex," he said slowly, "are we absolutely certain that Murphy is actually human and not some sort of cosmic practical joke disguised as a bipedal primate?" Lieutenant Kex was frantically scrolling through his datapad, cross-referencing Jake's species classification with every known database of galactic life forms. "Sir, according to his admission files, he's definitely human. Born on Earth, 3rd solar system, in a place called Ohio. Though there's a note here that says his hometown has something called a chemical plant, and that residents are advised to avoid drinking the tap water." Inside the chamber, Jake had apparently decided that this was the perfect time for an educational lecture. He stood up from his camping chair, marshmallow roasting stick in hand, and addressed his gasping classmates with the casual authority of someone who had clearly given this speech before. "Okay, so, I'm getting the sense that you guys are having some trouble with the whole poison gas thing," Jake said, taking a bite of his perfectly toasted marshmallow. "And I get it, I really do. But here's the thing about humans that maybe didn't make it into your xenobiology textbooks." Cadet Blorp, who had managed to fashion a crude breathing mask out of his own gelatinous material, made a sound that roughly translated to, "Please enlighten us before we die horribly." "See, Earth's atmosphere is basically poison to most galactic life forms," Jake continued, settling back into his chair like he was hosting a nature documentary. "What you guys call air, we call 78% nitrogen, 21% oxygen, and 1% various gases that would probably kill most of you if you breathed them straight." He gestured with his marshmallow stick at the green gas swirling around them. "This stuff you're all freaking out about? It's got maybe a 15% concentration of actual toxins. Back home we call that a light smog day. In Los Angeles, this would be considered premium air quality." Cadet Zara's crystalline form had stopped vibrating quite so violently, though she was still resonating at a frequency that made everyone's fillings ache. Through her emergency translator, she managed to ask, "But how do you survive on such a hostile world?" Jake's face lit up with the enthusiasm of someone who had found his favorite topic of conversation. "Oh man, where do I even start? Okay, so first off, we evolved breathing the exhaust fumes from volcanic eruptions. Our ancestors literally lived next to mountains that regularly belched sulfur dioxide and carbon monoxide into the atmosphere. We thought it smelled like home." He took another bite of marshmallow and continued. "Then there's acid rain. You know how most species consider acidic precipitation to be an extinction-level event? We just call it weather. I've been camping in acid rain. It's actually pretty relaxing once you get used to the slight tingling sensation." Commander Vex, still watching from the observation deck, felt one of his eyes begin to twitch. "Lieutenant, please tell me he's exaggerating." Lieutenant Kex was now reading from what appeared to be an Earth environmental report. "Sir, according to this document, humans regularly engage in recreational activities in locations with atmospheric conditions that would require hazmat suits for most galactic species. They call it hiking." Inside the chamber, Jake was just getting started. "Oh, and then there's our hobbies. We climb mountains where the air is too thin to breathe properly. We swim in oceans full of creatures that can kill us in dozens of creative ways. We go camping in deserts where the daytime temperature can literally cook most proteins." He paused to construct another s'more with the methodical precision of someone who took their campfire snacks very seriously. "My buddy Rick once went backpacking through what you guys would probably classify as a Class 9 toxic waste zone. We call it Yellowstone National Park. He said the geysers were spectacular." Cadet Finn had apparently decided that Jake's lecture was more interesting than slowly suffocating in his shell, because his eye stalks had emerged enough to focus on the human. Through his breathing apparatus, he managed to ask, "What about your home's native wildlife?" Jake's grin widened. "Oh, you're gonna love this. We share our planet with creatures that can crush cars, inject enough venom to kill an elephant, or just straight up eat you because they're having a bad day. And what do? We make documentaries about them. We call them nature shows, and we watch them for entertainment." He gestured expansively with his marshmallow stick. "We've got spiders the size of dinner plates, snakes that can dislocate their jaws to swallow things 3 times their head size, and bears that can run faster than most of your hover cars. Last summer, I went camping in bear country. Saw 3 of them. Great trip." The chamber had grown unusually quiet, except for the steady hiss of the poison gas dispensers and the crackling of Jake's campfire. Even the aliens, who were still struggling with their breathing apparatus, seemed to be paying attention. "The point is," Jake said, settling back in his chair and propping his feet up on what appeared to be a military-issued equipment crate he was using as a footstool, "you guys are treating this like it's dangerous. But for humans, this is just Tuesday. I've breathed worse air walking past the paper mill in my hometown." What happened next would later be recorded in the Galactic Military Academy's official records as the Murphy Incident, though historians would debate whether it should be classified as an educational breakthrough or a complete breakdown of military discipline. Jake stood up again, apparently deciding that his impromptu survival seminar needed visual aids. He walked over to where the poison gas was pouring most heavily from the ceiling nozzles and took what could only be described as a deep, appreciative breath. "Now this," he said, exhaling with the satisfaction of someone sampling a fine wine, "has got some nice complexity to it. I'm detecting hints of chlorine, maybe some sulfur compounds, and is that a touch of ammonia? Really brings me back to cleaning day at my high school chemistry lab." Cadet Blorp had managed to stabilize his gelatinous form enough to speak, though his voice came out as more of a horrified gurgle. "You're analyzing the poison gas like it's a beverage?" "Well, yeah," Jake replied, as if this were perfectly reasonable behavior. "How else are you going to understand what you're working with? Back on Earth, we've got this thing called quality control. You can't improve your tolerance to environmental hazards if you don't know what you're tolerating." He began walking around the chamber, gesturing at various features like a tour guide showing off local attractions. "See, the problem with your approach is that you're thinking of this as a survival situation, but really, it's just another day outdoors. Let me give you some perspective here." Jake pulled out what appeared to be a worn notebook from his pocket and flipped it open. "Okay, so last year I went on a family camping trip to the Adirondack Mountains. Beautiful place, really scenic, except for the part where we accidentally set up camp downwind from a natural gas leak. Commander Vex's voice crackled over the chamber's intercom system. Murphy, are you saying you voluntarily camped in a location with a gas leak? Oh, we didn't know about the gas leak until the second day, Jake replied cheerfully. We just thought the area had really unique atmospheric conditions. My dad kept saying the air had character. Turns out the character was methane and hydrogen sulfide. He flipped to another page in his notebook. Then there was the time we went hiking in what Mom called the scenic route, through the old mining district. Turned out the scenic route went right through an abandoned copper mine with naturally occurring acid drainage. The rocks were these amazing bright orange and green colors, really photogenic. Cadet Zara, who had finally stopped vibrating enough to speak clearly, asked through her translator, "Did anyone in your family experience adverse health effects?" Jake looked genuinely puzzled by the question. Adverse effects? Nah, we all had a great time. My little sister collected some of the pretty colored rocks. Mom made her wash her hands afterward, but that's just standard outdoor safety protocol. He continued flipping through his notebook with the enthusiasm of someone sharing vacation photos. Oh, here's a good one. 2 summers ago we went camping near Lake Centralia. It's this beautiful spot in Pennsylvania where the ground has been on fire for like 60 years. Underground coal seam caught fire back in the 1960s and just never stopped burning. Lieutenant Kex's voice joined Commander Vex on the intercom, though it had taken on the strained quality of someone whose worldview was experiencing rapid decompression. The ground was on fire and you went camping there? Well, not the whole ground, Jake clarified, just most of it. You had to be careful where you pitched your tent, obviously. The trick is finding spots where the soil temperature is below the combustion point of your camping gear. It's all about planning ahead. By this point, several of the alien cadets had stopped focusing on their breathing apparatus and were staring at Jake with the kind of fascination usually reserved for natural disasters, or particularly spectacular traffic accidents. Cadet Finn had emerged almost completely from his shell, apparently deciding that listening to Jake's camping stories was less dangerous than missing whatever revelation was coming next. What about food safety in these environments? Jake's face lit up like someone had just asked about his favorite hobby. Oh man. That's where it gets really interesting. See, when you're camping in areas with unusual atmospheric conditions, you've got to adjust your cooking techniques accordingly. He gestured toward his campfire, which was still cheerfully burning in the middle of the poison gas chamber. Like right now, this gas mixture is actually improving the combustion efficiency of my fire. I'm getting way better heat distribution than I would with normal air. These marshmallows are cooking perfectly. Jake pulled out what appeared to be a well-worn camping cookbook and began flipping through pages marked with colorful sticky notes. Here's a recipe my uncle taught me for trail mix that's specifically designed for high-toxicity environments. The key is using nuts that have been naturally exposed to industrial pollutants. Gives them this great smoky flavor and builds up your immunity at the same time. He found the page he was looking for and showed it to the nearest group of cadets, who leaned in with the morbid curiosity of people watching a slow-motion disaster. And this is my grandmother's recipe for what she called adventure soup. You make it with whatever water you can find locally, no matter what color it is or how many warning signs are posted nearby. She always said that if the water glows in the dark, it's probably got extra minerals that are good for you. Commander Vex's voice over the intercom had taken on the tone of someone experiencing a complete existential crisis. Murphy, are you telling me that your family actively seeks out hazardous environments for recreational purposes? Seeks out? Jake looked genuinely confused. No, sir, we just go places. Earth is hazardous. Every environment is potentially lethal. You can't avoid danger, so you might as well enjoy it. He gestured around the chamber with obvious appreciation. Like this place. You've got controlled atmospheric conditions, climate-controlled temperature, emergency safety protocols, and backup life support systems. This is luxury camping compared to most places I've been. Jake sat back down in his folding chair and pulled out what appeared to be a thermos from his camping supplies. Anyone want some hot chocolate? I brought extra. 6 months later, the Galactic Military Academy's annual graduation ceremony was proceeding with all the pomp and circumstance that military institutions could muster. Which is to say, it was extremely formal, somewhat tedious, and featured an uncomfortable number of speeches about honor and duty. The ceremony was being held in the Academy's Great Hall, a massive space designed to accommodate the various atmospheric requirements of dozens of different species. The air filtration system alone cost more than most planets' annual defense budgets, and the Architectural Committee had spent 3 years arguing about whether the stage should be elevated enough to accommodate species that communicated through interpretive dance. That is, Admiral Crox, the Academy's commandant, stood at the podium reviewing his notes for the traditional graduation address. Admiral Crox was a Veldorian, which meant he looked like what would happen if you crossed an octopus with a filing cabinet and then gave the result a military education and a serious caffeine addiction. His species was known for their methodical approach to military protocol and their complete inability to understand why other species found bureaucracy stressful. Ladies, gentlemen, and assorted biological configurations, Admiral Crox began in the time-honored tradition of military officials who had attended too many diversity seminars. We gather today to celebrate the achievements of this year's graduating class. The usual litany of achievements followed. Highest marks in theoretical xenobiology, outstanding performance in zero-gravity combat simulations, exemplary conduct in diplomatic protocol studies. All very standard, very predictable, very in line with centuries of military academic tradition. And then Admiral Crox reached the special commendations. This year's recipient of the Innovation in Survival Techniques Award goes to Cadet Jake Murphy for his groundbreaking work in what he calls recreational hazard management. Jake stood up from his seat in the front row, where he had somehow managed to smuggle in what appeared to be a small camping chair despite the ceremony's formal seating arrangements. He was wearing his dress uniform, though he had somehow accessorized it with what looked suspiciously like hiking boots and a utility belt that definitely contained more camping supplies than military equipment. Cadet Murphy's approach to survival training has revolutionized our understanding of environmental adaptation, Admiral Crox continued, reading from notes that his aide had assured him were accurate, though they seemed increasingly surreal with each sentence. His technique of treating potentially lethal atmospheric conditions as recreational opportunities has resulted in a 47% improvement in survival rates among his fellow cadets. The audience, composed primarily of military officials and proud family members, applauded politely. Most of them had no idea what recreational hazard management meant, but it sounded appropriately military and innovative. Admiral Crox flipped to the next page of his notes and paused, his 8 eyes focusing on the text with the expression of someone who was beginning to suspect that reality had taken an unauthorized detour. Additionally, Cadet Murphy has been awarded the Academy's first ever medal for services to interdisciplinary education in recognition of his work teaching practical xenobiology through what he calls comparative camping experiences. Jake waved cheerfully at the audience, apparently unbothered by the fact that he was receiving military honors for essentially turning survival training into a nature documentary. Furthermore, Admiral Crox continued, though his voice was beginning to carry the strained quality of someone reading a script that seemed to have been written by a committee of practical jokers. Cadet Murphy's innovations have led to significant policy changes within the Academy's training protocols. He cleared his throat and consulted what appeared to be an official policy memorandum. Effective immediately, the Academy has implemented new guidelines for survival training exercises. Human cadets are now classified as having unfair evolutionary advantages in hazardous environment training and will be exempted from standard survival exercises. A murmur ran through the audience, though whether it was impressed or confused was difficult to determine. Admiral Crox continued reading from the policy memo, with the dedication of someone who had long ago given up trying to understand the decisions made by military bureaucracy. Instead, human cadets will be assigned as survival consultants to assist other species in developing appropriate coping strategies for environmental hazards. Jake raised his hand with the casual enthusiasm of someone asking a question in a college lecture hall. Does that mean I can officially add marshmallow roasting to the emergency rations manual? Admiral Crox consulted his notes, flipped through several pages, and then looked up with the expression of someone who had just realized that their career had taken a turn that no amount of military training could have prepared them for. According to this memorandum, yes. The Academy's Department of Survival Sciences has officially recognized marshmallow roasting as a viable morale maintenance technique for extended survival situations. The applause that followed was considerably more enthusiastic, primarily from Jake's fellow cadets, who had apparently developed a deep appreciation for his approach to military education. Additionally, Admiral Crox continued, now reading with the resigned tone of someone who had accepted that his reality was no longer bound by conventional logic. The Academy's Atmospheric Hazards Training Division has requested that Cadet Murphy assist in designing new survival courses that provide what they term appropriate challenge levels for human participants. Jake's hand shot up again. Can we make them camping-themed? I've got some great ideas for overnight survival exercises in locations with interesting atmospheric conditions. From somewhere in the audience came the sound of Commander Vex quietly sobbing. He had submitted his resignation immediately after the poison gas incident, and had spent the last 6 months training to become a meditation instructor on a peaceful garden world where the most dangerous thing was aggressive flower arranging. Admiral Crox looked down at his final note, blinked all 8 eyes in sequence, and then looked directly at Jake. "Cadet Murphy, the Academy would like to know if you have any recommendations for locations that might provide an appropriate level of environmental challenge for human survival training." Jake's face lit up with the enthusiasm of someone who had just been asked to design their dream vacation. "Oh, absolutely. I've got this list of places back on Earth that would be perfect. There's this spot in Australia where everything is poisonous, a desert in Africa where the sand dunes sing opera, and this really cool volcano in Hawaii that's been erupting continuously since 1983. Plus, my cousin knows about this cave system in Mexico where the air is so toxic that most life forms can't survive, but the formations are absolutely beautiful." Admiral Crox closed his notes, straightened his uniform, and looked out at the audience with the expression of someone who had just realized that his species' reputation for methodical military planning had not prepared them for the reality of working with humans. "Ladies, gentlemen, and assorted biological configurations," he said with the tone of someone delivering a eulogy for conventional military protocol. "I present to you this year's graduating class of the Galactic Military Academy. May they survive whatever assignments they receive, and may their commanding officers have adequate medical insurance." As the ceremony concluded and the graduates filed out to begin their military careers, Jake could be heard asking his fellow cadets if anyone wanted to join him for a celebratory camping trip to what he described as this really interesting toxic waste site he had found in the Academy's environmental database. Commander Vex, watching from the back of the auditorium where he was attending his final Academy function before departing for his new career in therapeutic horticulture, made a mental note to recommend that all garden worlds implement strict immigration screening policies for humans. After all, someone who considered poison gas survival training to be a recreational opportunity probably thought aggressive flower arranging sounded like an exciting challenge.